Somewhere in Los Angeles this morning, a man you have never met opened a package from an online vendor. Inside was a small glass vial, a few millimeters of liquid, and a sticker that reads in clear black letters, "Not for human consumption." And then he injected it into his stomach. This is not a crime. Technically, nothing illegal has occurred. The vial was sold for research purposes. He is, in the eyes of the market, a researcher. His lab is his kitchen counter, his research subject is himself, and the findings will be published on Reddit. That vial probably contained a peptide called BPC 157. And if you zoom out from this one guy's kitchen, you'll notice he's not alone. He's part of a market that, depending on how you count, is worth somewhere between hundreds of millions and several billion dollars a year. It has pharmacies, it has podcasts, it has a cold plunge lobbying strategy. We'll get to that. Meanwhile, about 3 miles away, a woman is getting her monthly shipment of a compounded semaglutide from a telehealth company she found on Instagram. As of a couple months ago, she was paying $229 a month. Her neighbor was paying $1,350 for the brand name version of this exact same molecule. They will not discuss this at book club. These two people think they're in completely different worlds. They are, in fact, in the same world. That world has a name. It's called the American peptide economy, and today we're going to try to understand how exactly it got like this. So, what even is a peptide? Let's start from the top because peptide has become one of those words that shows up on wellness supplement bottles next to adaptogen and bioavailable, and I need you to know it actually means a specific chemical thing. A peptide is a chain of amino acid linked together by peptide bonds. That's the whole definition. 2 amino acids joined together, dipeptide. A dozen, oligopeptide. Somewhere between 40 and 100 residues, we usually stop calling it a peptide and start calling it a protein, because biochemists love to redraw the line on a gradient and then argue about it for 100 years. The FDA, for regulatory purposes, draws the line at exactly 40 amino acids. Under 40, it's a peptide drug. Over 40, it's a biologic. This is legally load-bearing, and we'll come back to it. The peptide bond itself is an amide linkage. Carboxyl groups of one amino acid reacts with the amino group of the next, water leaves, and you get a covalent bond that's planar, rigid, and pretty stable under neutral conditions. So why does any of this matter for the story we're telling? There's 3 reasons. 1. Peptides are messengers. Your body makes them constantly. Insulin is a peptide, glucagon is a peptide, oxytocin, vasopressin, ghrelin, GLP-1, all peptides. They bind receptors, they turn on signaling cascades, they do things. This is why pharma cares about them. If you can mimic a peptide your body already uses, you can hijack a pathway that evolution already built. Reason 2, peptides are fragile. If you swallow most peptides, your stomach eats them. Proteases in your GI tract cleave the peptide bonds, and what doesn't get cleaved mostly can't cross the intestinal wall anyway, because peptides are too big and too polar. This is why peptide drugs are almost always injectables. It's also why the oral bioavailability of native GLP-1 is, and I'm rounding up here, 0. Reason number 3, and the one that matters most for everything else, peptides are easy to make. Not biologically easy, chemically easy. A well-trained organic chemist with a solid-phase peptide synthesizer, a reagent supplier, and a lyophilizer can make a kilogram of almost any peptide you want. Solid-phase synthesis, pioneered by Bruce Merrifield in 1963, won him the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1984, precisely because it turned peptide synthesis from a nightmare into a recipe. You protect your amino acid, you couple it, you deprotect it, you wash, repeat. A 15-residue peptide takes about a week. This is the single most important fact to hold in your head for the rest of the episode. Peptides are a Nobel Prize's worth of easy to make. And that means anyone, and I mean anyone, can make them. Reputable pharma companies, compounding pharmacies, Chinese contract manufacturers, and guys named Brad in a warehouse in Nevada. The question of who makes your peptide is not a scientific question. It is a regulatory question. And regulation, as we will see, is where everything gets weird. Welcome to the Peptide Gold Rush. Let me introduce you to BPC 157. BPC stands for Body Protection Compound. The 157 is its position in a longer protein, or at least a longer protein that the Croatian research group who has discovered it proposed exists in human gastric juice. The full parent protein has, to date, never actually been characterized in the human proteome. What we have is the 15 amino acid fragment. Everyone calls it a stomach peptide. You should know that this part is a little hand-wavy. The sequence, if you care, is gly glu pro 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 gly lys pro alla asp asp alla gly lu val. That string of amino acids has been studied in somewhere around 100 preclinical papers for its effects on wound healing, tendon repair, gut inflammation, and angiogenesis. The proposed mechanism involves upregulation of VEGFR2 signaling and nitric oxide pathway modulation, which, if true, would plausibly explain the tissue repair effects. I want to flag one thing about that preclinical literature, though. Nearly all of it, and I mean nearly all of it, comes out of a single research group in Croatia, led by a scientist named Predrag Sikiric. This doesn't make the research wrong, it makes it unreplicated, which in biochemistry is a different and meaningful problem. The FDA has looked at this body of evidence and concluded that it is not sufficient to establish safety in humans. WADA looked at it and banned the compound for athletes in 2022. The Department of Defense looked at it and put it on its list of prohibited supplements for service members. The American wellness industry looked at the exact same evidence and said, "This is the most exciting thing we've ever seen." So what happens when the FDA says you can't sell a thing and a lot of people really want to sell that thing and it's also really easy to make? You get a gray market. In the gray market, I want to be careful with this word because it's doing a lot of work, is not a small, embarrassed thing hiding in a corner. It is enormous, it is well lit, it has its own trade shows. Here's how it actually functions. On September 29, 2023, the FDA classified BPC 157 as a Category 2 bulk drug substance. That means two things. First, licensed compounding pharmacies, the ones working under Sections 503A and 503B of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, are not supposed to compound it for human use. Second, there's insufficient evidence that it's safe. What Category 2 classification did not do is make it illegal to possess BPC 157. Peptides, unlike anabolic steroids, are not DEA scheduled. They're just unapproved drugs that you can't legally sell for human use. So here's the elegant solution the market arrived at. You sell BPC 157 and every other peptide like it as a research chemical. The bottle says not for human consumption. The website says not for human consumption. The shipping label says not for human consumption. And then every single customer, everyone without exception, consumes it, puts it directly into a human, their own human. This is the core legal fiction that the entire gray market peptide industry runs on. It is, to be clear, theater. Everyone involved knows it's theater. The seller knows, the buyer knows, the FDA knows. It is, as some lawyers put it, plausible deniability as a business model. The peptides in this market aren't just BPC 157. There's a whole catalog. TB500, a synthetic fragment of thymosin 4, usually the heptapeptide ACLKKTETQ. CJC 1295, usually sold with ipamorelin. CJC 1295 is an analog of growth hormone releasing hormone, the long-acting DAC version. DAC stands for Drug Affinity Complex. Adds a maleimide lysine at position 30 that covalently reacts with cysteine 34 of serum albumin, forming a thioether bond. That's the actual chemistry. A Michael addition onto albumin, which extends the half-life from about 30 minutes to roughly a week. Ipamorelin, meanwhile, is a ghrelin receptor agonist. Together, they pulse growth hormone release. Melanotan-2, a melanocortin receptor agonist, originally developed for sunless tanning, also causes, as an off-target effect, spontaneous erections. This is marketed as a feature. Thymosin 4 is an endogenous actin-sequestering peptide. It binds G-actin monomers one-to-one and keeps them out of filaments, maintaining the cellular pool of polymerization-ready actin. So when you hear TB500 is good for muscle healing, the proposed mechanism is actually the opposite of what most people assume. It doesn't build fibers, it regulates the monomer reservoir that cells draw from during repair. Some of these have real, interesting preclinical biochemistry behind them. Others are essentially vibes with a sequence diagram. All of them can be ordered online in vials labeled not for human consumption and shipped to your house. The going rate is somewhere between $30 and $100 a vial, depending on the peptide, the vendor, and whether the vendor has been rated yet. GHK copper, MOTSC, Epidolon, Selenc, CMAX, AOD 9604, KPV. An alien language. In December 2025, a longevity podcaster named Gary Brecka, who, among other things, sells BPC 157 nasal spray blend for $375 a bottle, hosted the FDA Commissioner Marty Makary along with Deputy Commissioner for Human Foods Kyle Diamantis at his facility in Miami. According to Brecka's own account of the meeting, he had the Commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration of the United States of America and his deputy change into board shorts and sit in a 50-degree cold plunge. I'm going to say that again because I need you to understand I'm not making it up. The FDA Commissioner, the FDA Deputy Commissioner, cold plunge, board shorts provided. Brecka described the meeting as having turned them into converts. 2 months later, on February 27, 2026, on episode 2461 of the Joe Rogan Experience, which is, for the record, how major American regulatory policy is now sometimes announced, the Department of Health and Human Services Secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., said that the FDA would reclassify most of the peptides sitting in Category 2, moving them back toward legal compounding access. 6 weeks after that, on April 15th of this year, the formal FDA action dropped. 12 peptides removed from Category 2, effective April 22, 2026, with a Pharmacy Compounding Advisory Committee review scheduled for late July to decide which of them can rejoin the 503A bulks list. In the Rogan announcement, Kennedy said, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't want to misquote, the Category 2 restrictions had created the gray market they were supposed to prevent. He is uncomfortably not wrong. It's worth being clear about what this reclassification does and doesn't do, though. Moving a peptide out of a Category 2 is not FDA approval. It doesn't mean there are clinical trials. It doesn't mean the peptide works. It means licensed compounding pharmacies operating under USP sterility standards can potentially make it again, pending the July review, instead of the market being served exclusively by vendors with Cloudflare-protected checkout pages. That is a meaningfully different thing. It is also arguably a better safety outcome than the status quo. We'll come back to this. Because here's the thing about a black market for injectable medical products. The issue isn't really whether the molecule works, the issue is whether the vial in your hand contains what the label says it contains. In the amount the label says, without endotoxin, without residual synthesis solvents, without truncated or racemized impurities that could be immunogenic. Peptide impurities are a known biochemistry problem. They're one of the biggest sources of anti-drug antibody responses in peptide therapeutics. That's a thing actually worth being scared of. The FDA's case for putting BPC 157 in Category 2 was, essentially, we don't know what's in the vial. And when they cracked down, the market's response was not, great, let's do better studies. The market's response was to move from licensed compounding pharmacies, which have at least USP 797 sterility standards, certificates of analysis, and accreditation, to completely unregulated vendors shipping from addresses that turn over every 6 months. So the regulatory crackdown made the product objectively less safe. This is the FDA admitting in February 26. It's also what enforcement pros would call a predictable outcome of not thinking very hard about what happens next. Now, there There is a peptide story running parallel to the gray market story that is, technically, legally, pharmaceutically, completely different. And also, if you squint, exactly the same. Let's talk about GLP-1. Glucagon-like peptide 1, or more precisely, the active form GLP-1 736-amide, because the precursor, proglucagon, is 160 amino acids and gets processed in L cells into several different fragments, is a 30 amino acid peptide hormone secreted by L cells into your intestine after you eat. It does 4 things, all of which are relevant to why it is currently one of the most profitable molecules in the history of medicine. 1. It stimulates glucose-dependent insulin secretion from pancreatic beta cells, binds the GLP-1 receptor, a G-protein-coupled receptor, activates Gs, up goes C-AMP, PKA and EPAC get activated, and insulin gets released. Crucially, this is glucose-dependent. The pathway only fires when blood glucose is elevated, which means, unlike older diabetes drugs, it doesn't crash your blood sugar when you skip lunch. 2. It suppresses glucagon release from pancreatic alpha cells. 3. It slows gastric emptying. Your stomach takes longer to hand food off to your small intestine, so glucose absorption is gentler and you feel full longer. 4. In the brain, it reduces appetite, primarily through POMC neurons in the arcuate nucleus of the hypothalamus, but also through the nucleus tractus solitarius in the brainstem and the area postrema. Central satiety distributed across several circuits. So far, so elegant. Native GLP-1 is a terrific molecule. It has exactly one problem as a drug. Its half-life is under 2 minutes. The enzyme DPP-4, dipeptidyl peptidase 4, floating around in your plasma and anchored on endothelial cells, recognizes the N-terminus and cleaves between alanine at position 8 and glutamate at position 9, releasing a useless dipeptide and destroying receptor affinity. Your body makes GLP-1 and destroys it on a conveyor belt, continuously, because nothing about GLP-1 was designed to be a once-weekly weight loss injection. It was designed to respond to a salad. The problem drug developers had for about 20 years was, how do you take a 2-minute peptide and turn it into a 1-injection-a-week peptide? The answer is beautiful. And it is the reason that Novo Nordisk, the company that makes Ozempic, is currently one of the most valuable companies in Europe. They made 3 modifications to GLP-1. First, they replaced the alanine at position 8, using the standard GLP-1 numbering with a non-canonical amino acid called the alpha-amino-isobutyric acid, or AIB. It's alanine with an extra methyl group on the alpha carbon, so the alpha carbon has 4 substituents instead of 3. DPP-4 tries to cleave next to it and can't physically fit. Blocking the protease costs them a single methyl group, 1 carbon and 3 hydrogens. That's it. Second, they swapped the lysine at position 34 for an arginine. This isn't the famous modification, but it matters. It prevents the manufacturing process from accidentally attaching the next modification to the wrong lysine. Chemistry is a precision sport. Third, and this is the clever one, they attached a fatty tail to the remaining lysine at position 26. The tail is not simple. It's a C18 diacid. 18 carbons, carboxylic acid groups at both ends, connected to lysine through a 3-part linker. A gamma-glutamic acid spacer, followed by 2 units of OEG, which is 8-amino-3,6-dioxytenoic acid, a little polyethylene glycol-like spacer. The fatty end of this whole assembly inserts into a hydrophobic pocket on serum albumin, and the albumin-bound drug circulates for days instead of minutes. Kidney filtration can't touch it because it's ridden along with a big protein. A gamma-glutamic acid spacer, followed by 2 units of OEG, which is 8-amino-3,6-dioxyoctanoic acid, a little polyethylene glycol-like spacer. The fatty end of this whole assembly inserts into a hydrophobic pocket on serum albumin, and the albumin-bound drug circulates for days instead of minutes. Kidney filtration can't touch it because it's ridden along with a big protein. That's a semaglutide, native GLP-1 plus 1 methyl group, plus a conservative amino acid substitution, plus a very carefully engineered fatty appendage. Half-life, about 165 hours. Once weekly dosing. Sold under the brand names Ozempic, Wegovy, and Rybelsus. Gross 2024 revenue across the 3 brands, approximately $29 billion. Tirzepatide from Eli Lilly does something similar with a different trick. It's a dual agonist that hits both the GLP-1 receptor and the GIP receptor, GIP being another incretin hormone. And it hits them unequally. Tirzepatide binds GIP's receptor with affinity comparable to native GIP, but binds the GLP-1 receptor with roughly 5 times lower affinity than native GLP-1. And at that receptor, it shows what pharmacologists call bias signaling. It preferentially activates CAMP pathway over the beta-arrestin pathway, which means less receptor internalization and potentially sustained signaling. Combined action, better weight loss outcomes in head-to-head trials, currently sold as Mounjaro for diabetes and Zepbound for weight loss. These are real drugs, phase 3 trials, proper FDA approval, quality manufacturing, full pharmacovigilance. There is no comparison scientifically between semaglutide and BPC 157. One is a rigorously validated therapeutic. The other is a Croatian rat study with a marketing department. And yet, in 2022, Americans wanted these drugs faster than Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly could make them. The FDA put semaglutide and tirzepatide on its drug shortage list. And the shortage list, as it turns out, is one of the more interesting pieces of American pharmaceutical regulation. Because when a drug is on the shortage list, it unlocks something called compounding. Compounding is a pharmacy practice that dates back to literally the beginning of pharmacy. A licensed pharmacist working from bulk active pharmaceutical ingredients formulates a drug for a specific patient. 503A pharmacies do patient-specific compounding. 503B facilities can do larger batches for hospital use. Both are regulated, though less tightly than full drug manufacturers. When semaglutide went on the shortage list, 503B outsourcing facilities started compounding semaglutide in bulk. Telehealth platforms, Hims, Henry Meds, Mochi, Breeze Meds, dozens of others paired up with these pharmacies and started selling compounded semaglutide injections for, as recently as early 2026, somewhere between $199 and $349 a month. The brand name drug was costing patients over $1,000 a month, often not covered by insurance. So millions of people, a genuinely unclear number but conservatively north of a million, switched to compounded versions. Those cheaper tiers are currently shrinking. In March 2026, Hims settled with Novo Nordisk and began transitioning customers to a direct-to-consumer brand Wegovy program at roughly $500 a month, which is closer to branded than to compounded pricing. The $200 compounded GLP-1 may be a historical artifact by the time you hear this. The FDA first removed tirzepatide from the shortage list on October 2, 2024, then reaffirmed the decision via declaratory order on December 19, 2024, after the compounding industry sued. Semaglutide followed on February 21, 2025. At that point, the legal basis for 503B bulk compounding went away. And here, finally, we arrive at the current mess. The FDA took the position that 503B outsourcing facilities had to stop. The Outsourcing Facilities Association sued, twice actually. One case over tirzepatide, Outsourcing Facilities Association v. FDA, Northern District of Texas 424 CV 00953, and a second over semaglutide 425 CV 00174. Preliminary injunctions were denied in both. The courts in essence said, the FDA is allowed to make this determination. 503A patient-specific compounding continued, though, because it doesn't depend on a shortage status. A licensed pharmacist writing a prescription for an individual patient operates under different rules. As of the FDA's April 1, 2026 clarification, which was released genuinely on April Fool's Day, neither semaglutide nor tirzepatide appears on the drug shortage list or the 503B bulks list. More importantly, the FDA spelled out for the first time what counts as essentially a copy of a commercially available drug, which is the legal category that 503A compounders have to avoid. The agency said a 503A pharmacy can produce a maximum of 4 prescriptions per calendar month of an essentially a copy product, and that adding small amounts of inert extras, the example the agency explicitly called out was cyanocobalamin, vitamin B12, in quantities with 10% of the commercial strength, does not change whether something counts as a copy. In practice, compounded GLP-1s remain widely available through the 503A pharmacies, often now formulated with glycine as a stabilizer to differentiate them from brand name formulations. The market read the April 1st guidance and adapted within about a week. The practical result: if you want GLP-1s in April 2026, you can still get them. The legality depends on which pharmacy, which state, and which lawsuit was most recently decided. So, two markets. One built around unapproved peptides with weak evidence, sold as research chemicals and injected by millions. The other built around rigorously validated peptide drugs, sold through regulatory loopholes and injected by millions. What's the common thread? Regulatory arbitrage. That's it. Both markets are profitable because pharmaceutical regulation in the United States has a bunch of narrow exemptions. Research chemicals, compounding, shortage lists, dietary supplements, and both markets route themselves into the gaps. The gray market peptide guy and the telehealth compounding pharmacy are doing, functionally, the same thing. They're selling a peptide that the FDA has not approved for the use to which the customer will put it, and they're using a legal loophole to do it. The difference is that one of them has a pharmacist and the other has a Cloudflare protected checkout page. Here's the biochemistry point I want you to take away from this because, after all, this is a biochemistry project. Peptides are an extraordinary class of molecules. They are sequence-specific. They fold into defined structures. They bind receptors with extraordinary selectivity. They are also chemically roughly as easy to synthesize as aspirin is to press into a tablet, which means the moat between a legitimate pharmaceutical peptide and an illicit one is purely a regulatory moat. It is not a chemistry moat. When you make a small molecule drug, the synthesis is usually hard. The patent protects you. The barrier to entry is real. With peptides, the barrier to entry is a building and a chemist. Every peptide drug from insulin on exists in a universe where anyone with modest resources can, in principle, make a copy. The one thing they can't easily do is make a pure, sterile, properly characterized copy. Impurity profiles matter. Immunogenicity matters. Endotoxin levels matter, and dose accuracy matters. This is what regulation is supposed to be doing. When it works, regulation is quality control. When it doesn't work, regulation is the reason a guy in Nevada is injecting himself with something that might be 85% BPC 157 and 15% truncated garbage. I think at the end of all of this, we land on something like the following. The FDA is, on almost every dimension that biochemistry students could care about, correct that the compounded and gray market peptides carry real risks. They're also, in many cases, correct that the underlying evidence for efficacy is weak. They're also, for reasons Secretary Kennedy acknowledged on the Rogan show in February, and the FDA implicitly endorsed when it reclassified 12 peptides out of Category 2 in April, probably making the actual safety situation worse by forcing the product out of regulated compounding pharmacies and into the hands of unregulated vendors. None of the three parties in this situation, the FDA, the compounders, or the customers, have a clean position. They're all doing something reasonable from their own point of view, and the aggregate outcome is a multi-billion-dollar industry where the legal status of any given vial is a matter of which state you're in, which lawsuit was decided this month, and whether your vendor is currently calling itself a pharmacy, a clinic, a research supplier, a supplement brand, or Kyle. That's the American peptide economy in the spring of 2026. The FDA commissioner and his deputy, if it's relevant, are still drying off. The information in this episode is accurate as of April 19th, 2026. You can read more with the sources that I will attach.